Here's something that completely changed the way I see ancient Rome, and honestly, it still won't let me rest. We're used to imagining Roman weddings as something solemn and beautiful. White togas, flowers, gods, blessings, the beginning of a happy life. But behind that polished facade existed a ritual so brutal and unsettling that today we would call it outright violence. Yet at the time, it was considered sacred. This is not fiction. It's not exaggeration. It's a real marriage tradition of ancient Rome, one that turned a wedding from a union of love into a public display of power, fear, and submission. And today, I want to tell this story not as a historian reading from a textbook, but from the inside, through the eyes of a Roman man who lived through this ritual and came to understand its true cost. By the end of this story, you'll see how a single tradition can shape an entire society, teaching people to confuse cruelty with order and obedience with virtue. And perhaps you'll recognize in it not only Rome, but something uncomfortably close to our own time. If this is your first time here, take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this kind of storytelling truly resonates with you. What matters to me is that we're not just consuming history, but thinking through it together. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. It's our way of gathering around a shared fire of memory, even if oceans and centuries separate us. Thank you sincerely for being here with me today. And now, without further words, let's begin. I'm writing this with my wedding torches still unburned, stacked like pale bones against the wall, and my hands won't stop smelling of smoke even though the fire hasn't been lit. Tomorrow, if the augurs don't find some ugly twist in the birds, if my father doesn't change his mind, if my future father-in-law doesn't suddenly remember a better offer, I'm meant to become a husband. That word looks clean when you carve it into wax. In Rome, a wedding is supposed to be a kind of public stitching. Two families pulled tight with knots and witness seals, property made orderly, children made legitimate, the gods bribed into smiling. Everyone acts like it's joy. Everyone loves the music, the jokes, the procession with torches, the crude songs the boys shout behind you. Dirty little blessings dressed as insults. Everyone points at the bride's flame-colored veil, the flammium, and sighs like it's the sunrise made cloth. But all day, men have been congratulating me the way soldiers clap each other on the shoulder before a breach. Steady, my uncle said, grinning with the corners of his mouth but not his eyes. Don't go soft, as if softness were a crime. The women, gods, the women, smiled too widely, like their lips were stitched from practice. My mother kissed my cheek and whispered, "Be a good master of your household. Not lover, not partner, master." The word landed between my ribs and stayed there. Maybe you'll laugh at me. Roman men aren't supposed to get troubled by customs. We inherit them like land. We inherit them like scars. But there's been this quiet nausea in me since the match was announced, the kind you feel before you step into a cold bath, your body already recoiling from what your mind insists is proper. And the worst part is that everyone keeps calling it a celebration. I've seen weddings. I've stood in the crowd while the bride is led out with her hair divided into 6 braids, tied with wool bands, her belt knotted in the so-called knot of Hercules. I've heard the chants. I know the words I'm expected to say, the little pieties that make the gods feel included. I've watched the moment at the doorway when the groom pretends not to want her too much and she pretends not to want him at all, because desire is shameful in a woman and weakness in a man. I thought all that was theater. Then today, at the house of my betrothed, I heard a different kind of laughter, low and satisfied, like men speaking about a punishment they won't receive. We were in the atrium. Her father, Lucius Calvus, senator, bull-necked and smooth as polished marble, was showing my father the marriage contract as though it were a trophy. The scribe had ink-stained fingers and the bored eyes of someone who's written 1,000 lies into law. My betrothed, Emilia, was not in the room. Of course she wasn't. Brides are brought out at the last moment like offerings. Calvus was talking about the procession, the feast, how many torches, how many witnesses, which priest he'd paid. Then he said, too casually, and we'll do it properly, as our mothers did. She'll be taken. I blinked. Taken. My father didn't even look up. He just pressed his thumb to the seal wax, approving it with the ease of a man signing off on a shipment of grain. Calvis smiled at me, almost kindly. You know, the old way. The way that reminds the girl what she is leaving behind. Emilia is coming willingly, I said, and my voice cracked on willingly like a boy's. At that, the men laughed, my father, her father, even the scribe, who tried to hide it behind his hand. Calvis leaned in, as if sharing a helpful secret. She must resist, he murmured. She must weep. Her mother must cling. He made a small pulling motion with his hands, like drawing a net from water. Remove her, in front of everyone. Otherwise the marriage lacks teeth. The women will talk. The gods will notice. I felt heat rise up my neck. That's a performance, I said, trying to make it sound like a correction instead of a plea. A symbol. Calvis's eyes hardened, just for a blink. Symbols are what Rome runs on, he said. We don't build empires with softness. Then, as if he were telling me how to tie a sandal, he added, when the moment comes, she will cry. You must not hesitate. If you hesitate, you shame her. You shame yourself. You shame us. My father finally looked at me. His expression held no anger, only surprise, the way you'd look at a dog that had suddenly started speaking Greek. Marcus, he said quietly, don't embarrass me. And in that instant, I understood. The ritual wasn't meant to bind us together. It was meant to show her, and everyone watching, that even on the day they call love, power still has a hand around her wrist. I left their atrium with my stomach turning and my ears ringing with laughter that didn't sound like joy at all. Tonight, in my own house, I keep seeing a doorway, and a girl on the other side of it, being taken for the sake of tradition. If I sleep, I'm afraid I'll dream of her hands clawing for her mother. And I'm afraid, more than that, of whose hands they'll insist are the ones doing the pulling. By morning, the city smelled like bread and incense, like nothing violent had ever happened or ever would. That's Rome's greatest lie. We cover brutality with ritual the way we cover corpses with flowers. I went to Emilia's house before the sun reached the roof tiles. I told myself I was going to reassure her, to explain that whatever they expected, I wouldn't hurt her, that I was different. Men always think that about themselves. The women were already awake. You could hear them before you saw them. Soft chanting, murmured instructions, the scrape of combs against hair. The atrium had been cleared of men. I was stopped at the threshold by her aunt, a sharp-nosed woman with iron-gray hair and hands like cords. You shouldn't be here, she said, but not unkindly. I need to speak to her. She studied me for a long moment, then stepped aside just enough for me to see. Emilia sat on a low stool, wrapped in white, her back straight in the way girls are taught when they are being shaped into something. Her hair was being divided into the 6 ritual braids, parted with the point of a spear, asta calabaris, they call it. A joke, I'd always thought. A relic. Watching it pierce the line of her hair, I stopped laughing inside. Her mother knelt before her, tying the wool bands with fingers that trembled despite all her authority. I expected tears. Instead, there was a tightness in her jaw that frightened me more. Emilia looked up and saw me. For a heartbeat, her face broke, just a crack, just enough to show the fear underneath. They say I must scream, she said quietly. The room went still. Her mother didn't turn around. You must, she replied. So everyone knows you were valued here. Valued. As if resistance were proof of worth. I don't want to scream, Emilia said. I don't want them to drag me. Her aunt clicked her tongue. All brides resist, even the happy ones. I found my voice, though it came out hoarse. She doesn't have to. I won't. Her mother finally faced me. There was something almost apologetic in her eyes, which somehow made it worse. You will, she said, because if you don't, they will say she ran to you. They will say she has no modesty. They will say I raised her wrong. Emilia's hands clenched in her lap. So I have to be afraid, she said, more to herself than to us. For appearances, her aunt leaned close and whispered, not softly enough, fear is part of being a wife. I wanted to tear the words out of the air. Instead, like a coward, I asked, "Does it hurt?" They all looked at me then, the women who had survived this passage, who had learned to call it necessary. Her mother answered, "Only if you hesitate." That was the moment I realized the cruelty was precise. Calculated. If I pulled her roughly, it would be tradition. If I hesitated, it would be my fault. Emilia met my eyes again. There was no romance in them. Only a question. Would I be Rome? Or would I be something else? And let her pay the price for it? By midday, the house was full of witnesses. That's what they called them. Witnesses. As if anyone was there to stop what was coming. The courtyard swelled with bodies. Uncles, clients, neighbors who barely knew her name, but would swear later that everything was done properly. The musicians tuned their pipes. Someone laughed too loudly. The torches waited, unlit, patient as spears. Emilia was kept inside. I wasn't meant to see her again until the moment. Lucius Calvus pulled me aside, his hand heavy on my shoulder. "Remember," he said, low and firm, "hesitation is insult. Take her cleanly, strongly." "I won't hurt her," I said. He smiled without warmth. "You misunderstand. This isn't about hurting her. It's about teaching her." Teaching. Always that word. My father joined us. "You look pale," he muttered. "Get hold of yourself. This is how it's done." "How it's always been done," I replied. "Yes," he said sharply. "And Rome still stands." The doors opened. Emilia appeared between two matrons, her veil a blaze of red against the white of her dress. For a moment, the noise faded. She looked small, not weak, but exposed like a throat. Her eyes searched the crowd until they found mine. There was again that question. The women began the chant. The old words, the ones that blur prayer and command. Emilia's mother stepped forward and wrapped her arms around her daughter, clinging hard enough to bruise. The crowd leaned in, eager. Now someone hissed. Emilia inhaled. Her scream came out sharp and real, cutting through the music. Not rehearsed, not gentle. It sliced straight into me. I froze. The chanting faltered. I felt every eye on my back. Calvus's voice snapped like a whip. "Marcus!" I stepped forward. My hand shook. Emilia struggled. Not theatrically, not gracefully. Her fingers dug into her mother's shoulders. Her mother sobbed loud enough for everyone to hear, though I could feel how deliberate it was. I touched Emilia's arm. She flinched. That sound, the small animal noise she made, broke something in me. "Enough," I said too softly. No one listened. "Take her," my father said through his teeth. And then I understood the lie at the center of it all. This wasn't about consent or resistance. It was about forcing a moment so public, so undeniable, that could never be questioned later. I could pull her away and be praised. Or I could refuse and watch the weight of Rome fall on her instead of me. Emilia's grip loosened, just a little. Her eyes never left mine. "Please," she whispered. I can still feel the heat of that courtyard on my skin, like the sun itself was complicit. "Please," Emilia whispered again, and this time it wasn't a plea for rescue. It was something worse. It was permission, or surrender. I still don't know which, and that ignorance eats at me more than guilt ever could. My hands closed around her arms. The crowd exhaled as one body, relieved. Approval rippled through them. Nods, murmurs, the soft sound Romans make when order is restored. I hated them for it. I hated myself more. She fought because she had to. I could feel the tension in her muscles, the careful calculation behind each movement. Not too much resistance, not too little. The choreography of survival. Her mother wailed and clutched at her dress, then released her at exactly the right moment, collapsing into other women's arms. I pulled, not roughly, not gently, precisely. Her sandals scraped stone. The sound went straight through my skull. She cried out again, louder this time, and someone laughed, quickly, nervously, as if afraid of enjoying it too openly. "Good," Calvus muttered behind me. "That's it. Good." Emilia stumbled against me. For a heartbeat. She was close enough that I could smell her hair oil, hear her breath hitch. Her hands found my wrist, not to fight, but to steady herself. "I hate this," she whispered, so low only I could hear. "I know," I said, and meant far more than she could ever guess. We crossed the threshold together, and the women ululated, that sharp, celebratory cry meant to scare away evil spirits. I wondered which of us they were meant to drive off. My chest felt hollow. Every step forward felt like something being buried behind me. Not just her girlhood, not just her father's house, but some simpler version of myself that still believed tradition could be harmless. When the torches were finally lit and pressed into our hands, the fire flared too close to her veil. I moved without thinking, shielding her with my body. Someone chuckled, already protective. They had no idea. As we walked toward my house, bound by law and spectacle, Emilia leaned closer and said, barely moving her lips, "They'll say I was taken by force." "Yes," I said. "And you?" I swallowed. "They'll say I did what was expected." She nodded once. A Roman nod. Small. Final. That was when the shame settled in. Not sharp, not dramatic, but heavy. Like stone laid carefully on stone. The kind of weight that doesn't crush you all at once. It just stays. My house had never felt so narrow. The doorway swallowed us, and the noise outside dulled as if Rome itself had decided its work was done. The gods had been appeased. The witnesses satisfied. Whatever happened next belonged to walls and shadows. Tradition demanded I lift her over the threshold. Another charm. Another precaution against evil spirits lurking in doorways. I hesitated just long enough for Emilia to stiffen, then nodded once. She wrapped an arm around my neck, light as a child, and I carried her in. Someone clapped. Inside, the air smelled of old smoke and oil lamps. Familiar. Safe. Except it wasn't. Not anymore. The women followed us in, bustling, efficient. They led her to the bed, where the woolen coverlet had been spread, thick and ceremonial. Someone loosened her veil. Someone else adjusted her tunic. Hands everywhere, none of them hers. I stood uselessly by the table, gripping a cup I hadn't realized I was holding. "Leave us," I said. The room froze. Her aunt raised an eyebrow. After the tying, of course. They brought out the belt, the one knotted in Hercules' knot, the symbol of fertility, strength, male conquest, dressed up as divine blessing. My hand were expected to undo it. Another lesson, another proof. Emilia looked at me steadily now. No tears, just endurance. I knelt. My fingers fumbled with the knot. It was tighter than it had any right to be, pulled firm by women who had learned exactly how much resistance tradition required. Sweat ran down my back. The room watched. When it finally loosened, there was a soft sound, cloth giving way, that felt louder than her scream had been. "Good," someone said again. Always that word. The women withdrew at last, satisfied, leaving us alone with the lamp flickering low. The door closed. The bolt slid home. Silence. Emilia sat on the edge of the bed, staring at her hands. I remained where I was, suddenly unsure where a husband was meant to stand when the ritual was over and the truth began. "They'll ask," she said quietly. "Tomorrow." The women. I nodded. "They'll want to know if you took me properly." My mouth felt dry. "What do you want me to say?" She laughed once, short, humorless. "What do you think?" And there it was. The final cruelty. Even now, even here, the ritual wasn't finished. It followed us into the dark, demanding lies to protect its own dignity. I sat beside her, careful not to touch. "I won't hurt you," I said, too late, too small. She didn't look at me. "You already did," she replied, not accusing, just stating a fact. That night, Rome slept well. Inside my house, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the slow, measured breathing of the woman I'd been taught to call mine, and wondered how many generations had mistaken obedience for order, and how much blood and fear had been hidden beneath the word tradition. Morning came without mercy. The light slipped through the shutters like an accusation, pale and exact. Somewhere outside, a vendor was already shouting about figs, as if the world hadn't tilted on its axis overnight. Rome never pauses for private ruin. Emilia was awake before me. She sat upright on the bed, hair loose now, veil folded neatly beside her. Composed. Anyone who saw her would have thought her already practiced at this. "They'll come soon," she said. I didn't ask who they were. I knew. The women. The witnesses again, in softer form. They would inspect her face, her walk, the set of her eyes. They would listen for hesitation in her voice, for shame or pride. They would decide whether the ritual had been completed correctly, whether the violence had been convincing enough. A knock sounded. Too early to be polite. I rose and opened the door to my mother, flanked by two matrons whose names I barely knew, but whose authority was absolute. Their eyes went straight to Emilia. "Well?" my mother asked, already smiling. Emilia stood. She lowered her gaze at exactly the right angle. As it should be, the women relaxed, satisfied. One of them touched Emilia's arm, not unkindly. "You'll thank him," she said. "In time." "Thank me." My mother turned to me. "You did well," she said, pride warm in her voice. "You didn't falter." I wanted to tell her that I had. That I faltered every moment I didn't refuse outright. But Rome doesn't recognize inner resistance. Only outcomes. The women left us with murmured blessings and practical advice. Children. Household order. Silence. When the door closed again, Emilia exhaled, the sound shaking despite her control. "That was the last test," she said. For now. For now," I repeated. I realized then that the ritual wasn't a single act. It was a beginning, a template, a lesson repeated until it felt like nature. "I could have stopped it," I said. She looked at me, not cruelly, not bitterly, just tired. "Yes," she replied, "but then it would have broken me instead of bending me." That was the moment the guilt sharpened into something unbearable. Not because she blamed me, but because she understood the system better than I did. Outside, Rome moved on. Contracts were honored. Gods were thanked. A marriage was recorded. Inside, I saw the truth clearly for the first time. The ritual had not been about joining two lives. It had been about teaching us both our places. And a lesson, once learned, was not easily unlearned. The days after the wedding were worse than the night. No chance. No torches. No witnesses to hide behind. Just habit settling in like dust. Emilia learned my house quickly, where the oil was kept, which slave moved silently, which one watched too closely. She spoke politely to everyone. She performed competence the way Rome teaches women to do, flawlessly and without complaint. That terrified me, because it meant the ritual had worked. At meals, my mother watched her like a judge watches a defendant who has already been convicted. "She's adapting well," she told my father. "She understands her role." Her role. Emilia caught my eye across the table and gave the smallest nod, a signal we had begun to use. "Endure now. Speak later." At night, when the house finally quieted, we talked in fragments. Not about love. Not yet. About boundaries. About what she would not be ordered to do. About what I could plausibly refuse without drawing attention. Our rebellion was small and unimpressive. I stopped using the language of ownership. I didn't call her Maya in public. I let her manage her dowry accounts herself. I dismissed a slave who reported on her movements a little too eagerly. Each act felt dangerous, though no one openly challenged me. Power, I learned, prefers silence to confrontation. Still, the pressure crept in. A friend joked over wine. "Has she learned obedience yet?" I stared at him until he laughed it off. A priest reminded me that harmony in a household reflected favor from the gods. Too much softness invites disorder, he warned. Disorder. Another word they hide behind. One evening, Emilia asked me, very calmly, "If we had a daughter, would you let this happen to her?" The question hit harder than any accusation. I didn't answer immediately. That was answer enough. "No," I said finally. "I wouldn't." She studied my face, searching for weakness, for convenience. "Then you already know this is wrong." "Yes." "Knowing isn't enough," she said. "Rome is built on men who know and do nothing." That night, I lay awake again, but this time the fear was different. Not of breaking tradition, but of becoming comfortable inside it. Our marriage, I realized, would not be defined by passion or obedience. It would be defined by how much cruelty we could quietly refuse before Rome noticed and decided to remind us who it belonged to. Rome always notices eventually. It started with small things, invitations that arrived late or not at all, a pause in conversation when Emilia entered a room, smiles that didn't reach the eyes. The city is excellent at punishing without admitting it's doing so. My father was the first to speak plainly. He came to the house one afternoon under the pretense of discussing estates. He dismissed the slaves, then rounded on me like a magistrate who had finally grown tired. "You're being discussed," he said. I didn't pretend ignorance. "About what?" He exhaled sharply. "About control. About your wife's influence." Influence. As if she were a foreign idea, smuggled in. "They say you let her speak too freely," he continued. "That you indulge her. That you undermine her modesty by treating her like—" He stopped, searching for the word. "An equal." I almost laughed. It came out wrong, sharp enough to make him flinch. "And this troubles Rome?" I asked. "It troubles men who matter," he snapped. "And men who matter shape Rome." He leaned closer. "You embarrassed her properly at the doorway. Don't undo it now by appearing weak." That word again. Weak. Later that week, a magistrate I barely knew praised Emilia's composure, then added casually, "Of course, a firm hand early prevents confusion later." His eyes never left mine. That night, Emilia listened as I told her. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, she said, "They're testing you." "Yes. They want to see if the ritual held." The realization settled cold in my chest. The wedding hadn't ended at the threshold or the bed or the morning inspection. It extended forward into every choice, every silence. "I can't protect you forever," I said. She nodded. "I don't need forever. I need honesty." I took her hands then, openly, deliberately. "If they force a choice," I said, "I won't choose Rome over you." She studied my face, weighing risk like someone long practiced at it. "That will cost you," she said. "I know." Outside, somewhere in the city, another wedding torch flared to life. Another girl screamed on cue. Another man proved his strength. And Rome, satisfied, tightened its grip, already preparing to see whether I would let it close again or finally pull my hand free. The choice, when it came, was smaller than I expected. No dramatic decree, no public trial, just a request dressed as advice. A cousin of mine, ambitious, newly aligned with a rising magistrate, invited us to dinner. Halfway through the meal, after the wine had loosened tongues, he smiled at Emilia and said, "You're fortunate. Most women don't need to be consulted." The word hung there, oily. I felt it then, the invisible line Rome had drawn, daring me to step over it. Emilia said nothing. She looked at her plate, perfectly composed. She had learned when silence was armor. This time, the test wasn't hers. I set my cup down. "My wife will be consulted," I said. "In my house, and anywhere she stands beside me." The table stilled. My cousin's smile tightened. "Careful," he said lightly. "People may think she commands you." "I hope they do," I replied. The air shifted. Not outrage, calculation. They were already deciding what this would cost me. Within weeks, it became clear. A promised appointment vanished. A legal favor stove. Friends grew distant, apologetic, but unmoved. My father stopped visiting altogether. One night, Emilia said, "They're isolating you." "Yes." She reached for my hand. "You could still step back." I looked at her. This woman Rome had tried to break at a doorway, who now sat unbroken at my table. "If I do," I said, "then the ritual wins twice." The consequences were not heroic. No exide, no martyrdom, just slow exclusion. A life made smaller by design. But something unexpected happened too. In private, men began to speak differently. One confessed envy. Another admitted fear. A young bride's brother thanked me, too quietly, for something he couldn't yet name. Resistance, I learned, rarely looks like victory. Sometimes it just looks like refusing to pass the cruelty forward. And in a city built on repetition, that alone was dangerous enough. Years have a way of sanding the sharpest edges. When I look back now, The wedding feels less like a single day and more like a fracture that never quite healed, but also never fully spread. Rome kept moving. So did we. Emilia and I learned each other slowly, in the spaces tradition hadn't claimed. There was affection, yes, but more than that, there was trust. Not the kind sung about in poetry. The kind built when two people know exactly how the world is stacked against them and choose, daily, not to use that weight on each other. We had a daughter. Holding her for the first time, I felt terror sharper than joy. Not of losing her, but of the future reaching for her with familiar hands. I watched the women coo and joke about her dowry, her beauty, her eventual resistance at some distant doorway, and I felt something in me harden. Emilia caught my expression and said, calmly, "She will not scream for Rome." We didn't announce it. We didn't challenge the law. We simply raised her differently. We taught her to speak plainly. We taught her that fear is not virtue. We taught her that tradition is a tool, not a god. Some nights, I still dream of that first scream, the real one, the one no ritual could fully script. I wake with my heart racing, and Emilia's hand grounds me back in the present. Still here, she whispers. Yes, still here. Rome did not fall because of us. The rituals continued. Doorways were crossed. Girls were taken and taught to call it honor. But something survived in our house that Rome had not planned for. Choice. It's fragile, easily crushed. But once you've seen a tradition for what it is, once you've felt the human cost under your hands, you can never unsee it. Empires run on forgetting. We chose memory instead. Part 10. What survives? Years have a way of sanding the sharpest edges. While I look back now, the wedding feels less like a single day and more like a fracture that never quite healed, but also never fully spread. Rome kept moving. So did we. Emilia and I learned each other slowly, in the spaces tradition hadn't claimed. There was affection, yes, but more than that, there was trust. Not the kind sung about in poetry. The kind built when two people know exactly how the world is stacked against them and choose, daily, not to use that weight on each other. We had a daughter. Holding her for the first time, I felt terror sharper than joy. Not of losing her, but of the future reaching for her with familiar hands. I watched the women coo and joke about her dowry, her beauty, her eventual resistance at some distant doorway, and I felt something in me harden. Emilia caught my expression and said, calmly, "She will not scream for Rome." We didn't announce it. We didn't challenge the law. We simply raised her differently. We taught her to speak plainly. We taught her that fear is not virtue. We taught her that tradition is a tool, not a god. Some nights, I still dream of that first scream. The real one, the one no ritual could fully script. I wake with my heart racing, and Emilia's hand grounds me back in the present. Still here, she whispers. Yes, still here. Rome did not fall because of us. The rituals continued. Doorways were crossed. Girls were taken and taught to call it honor. But something survived in our house that Rome had not planned for. Choice. It's fragile, easily crushed. But once you've seen a tradition for what it is, once you've felt the human cost under your hands, you can never unsee it. Empires run on forgetting. We chose memory instead. I'm an old man now, or near enough to it that the distinction hardly matters. My hands shake when I write this, not from age alone, but from memory, from the weight of things done correctly, lawfully, and still wrong. Rome will tell you it endures because it honors tradition, that our customs bind us to the past like anchors, that without them, we drift. Here's what I learned instead. Some traditions are anchors. Others are chains. I have stood in many doorways since my wedding day. I have watched sons become husbands, daughters become wives. I have seen the same rituals replayed with new faces, the same screams justified as symbols, the same cruelty polished until it looks respectable. And every time I see that courtyard again, I feel Emilia's arm under my fingers. I hear the approval in the crowd when order was restored. That sound never leaves you. People like to say, it was a different time, as if time itself commits the violence, as if hands move on their own when enough ancestors approve. But it is always people, choosing or refusing to choose. I did not stop the ritual. I will carry that failure until my ashes cool. But I learned slowly, painfully, that obedience is not neutrality. Silence is not innocence. And tradition, when left unquestioned, does not preserve humanity. It consumes it. If anyone ever reads this, if these words survive longer than my name, remember this. Just because something is ancient does not make it sacred. Just because everyone accepts it does not make it just. And just because you are expected to do harm does not mean you are absolved when you comply. Rome taught me how to take a wife. My life with Emilia taught me how to be human. And if there is one warning worth passing forward through all the noise of history, it is this. When a culture asks you to prove your strength by breaking someone else, what is really testing is how easily you can be made to forget that they are human at all.